Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our jam space in the virtual space. I am Allison Fox. This is my good friend and colleague, Zachary Scudlark, and we have been playing around with how to make music together online during this pandemic. So one of the ways that we found is by using a free tool online, a free website called Soundtrap.com. And Zach, since you're the one who introduced me to this wonderful technology, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about it for a sec and tell us what we're doing here.
All right. Let me go ahead and show you what I'm looking at here. So Soundtrap is music editing software. It is free to use. There are some paid features like auto tunes and things like that if you care to get into that. But everything we'll be doing today will be free. And so the very first thing, you go to soundtrap.com, you create yourself a login. You can link it to your Google account, might just be the easiest option there. From that screen, to start a project right away, you go to the Enter Studio button. That would create a brand new project. In returning to it later on, it would be found in this My Project area here. And so this Utah Blues, we're going to go with that one for today. So to rejoin something already created, use that To Studio button. Right, and then once we're there, there are a few things that you'll want to do to set up any project to be able to record. But one important part of setup is to make sure that you're using headphones. It's very important that you play along with the internal metronome in Soundtrap, so that if for editing purposes, whatever you might need to do, so that there is a constant through that. And so when you have that metronome, you don't want that click to end up in your final recording most of the time. And so you'll hear that through the headphones, and then whatever you play or sing, that'll be all that gets picked up by the microphone. You can feel free to use the microphone in your device, or if you have a USB mic, something like that, it's also, it will work in conjunction with that. And so from there, you would create the tracks, which you would have one for each instrument. Here, I've already created a track for guitar and bari sax. Both of these assume that those instruments will come in via a microphone. But if you needed to add more, you would add a new track, this button here towards the left-hand side of the screen. The way I created the first two was just clicking this button, and I'll do that again in a moment. But also, if you have a keyboard that you can connect with a MIDI cable or MIDI to USB, that's an option. You would choose this. Similarly, if you have a 1/4-inch cable to USB interface for a guitar or bass, that's also an option. Same if you have a drum machine. So there are some other options here, but we'll go with the voice and microphone for today. And close out of that temporarily. As far as titling things, which will be important as you start adding more and more tracks, just click on that. In a few minutes, we'll add a solo there. And I also already titled this one the entire song, but you would change that from up here. So next, I mentioned the metronome. As far as that's concerned, a lot of those controls are down here. We're going to go with a tempo of 100 beats per minute. And you could I can tap this, and I could set, if I just have a tempo in mind, I could set it using that. Or I could enter an actual number of beats per minute. So we'll go back to 100, but there are a few options there. Then also, this metronome area, just to the right of it, we have the gear button here. That can change the timbre of the metronome. So from a hi-hat or these clave, click, so some different sounds. You might find that one of these sounds cuts through the texture of what you've recorded better than the others. So that would be why you might want to consider those. Speaking of cutting through the texture of what you recorded, if you need to increase or decrease the volume of the metronome, you can do that there. Just make sure it's not so much that it spills out of the headphones and into the microphone. So you need to find that happy medium of where you can hear it, but the microphone doesn't pick it up. And then also to record, you can choose how many bars of a lead-in you get. I'm going to go with 2, and we'll see how that works in just a moment. Then finally, we will turn that metronome on by using the button next to the gear there. I'll also point out a couple buttons here in the upper right. So this snap to grid, it's helpful. This magnet-looking one, we'll use that in a minute once we have some recordings actually made. But the gear that's next to that could be the other important thing as you create a new project. So with that, this grid size, this can be adjusted from elsewhere. That could be important for you, but perhaps the most important thing is the time signature. And so an awful lot of songs are going to be in 4/4 time. But if you have something in 3/4, Happy Birthday would be a great example, then you might want to change that. And what that would do, I'll do by zooming in here, I'll show you, is that these measurements along the top, now we can see 3 beats per measure before getting to measure 2, and so on. I'm going to switch that back, since we'll be playing a blues in 4/4 today. And with that switch back, we can now see 4 beats per measure before we get to the next one. And that tool I use down here in the bottom right, the plus and minus, that's basically the same as changing the grid size. Up here, this upper area is referred to as the grid. So that's what happens when I zoom in and out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a bass line. So I selected this bari sax. In fact, I'll even call it bari sax bass so that there's no confusion. And I want to make sure that's selected. You potentially could record over something you didn't mean to if you selected the wrong area. I can give an example of that in a moment. But with that selected, I'll move the slider to where I want to begin, which is the very beginning of measure 1. And then I'm going to, in a moment, hit record. And so when I do that, I'm going to be hearing the click of the metronome in the headphones. I don't believe you'll hear that in the recording of this. And get this bass line laid down, and we'll take it from there. So as soon as I hit record, you will see that 2-measure count off that I had selected. You'll see that before I actually start playing. And again, if you want to change that for any reason, that's located right down here. So here we go. All right, and as I finish that, right at the very end, hit the record button again to stop the recording. And so we'll go back and have a quick listen to the first few moments of that, which we need to have this unmuted. So now that that's filled in, we'll be able to hear it, hopefully. Okay, and so something I'll point out here is that as you record, Soundtrap is very temperamental. It's very precise. Maybe that's the better word. Even if you feel you are right on top of the beat, that might not actually be the case. You might be a split second later. However, we can adjust for that. And so what I'm doing right now is I am zooming way in using the magnify and the plus button down here at the very beginning of what I played. And as we zoom way in, you'll notice there's measure 1, the beginning. Right there is the beginning of measure 2. You'll notice there is that very slight gap from the real beat 1 to where my sound started. And so I'll zoom in even more. We can see now I've zoomed in so much. There's beat 1, and there's measure 1, beat 2. That entire space there is just 1 beat worth of music. And we can see now there's a lot of dead space now that we've zoomed in that much. And so I'm going to, by clicking and dragging here, get rid of some of that. And my only recommendation with doing this is that you'll notice before we really get to the center of the sound, that there's a little bit that onset, the onset of the note. You usually do want to keep that. If you eliminate that, you start to lose track. Becomes more difficult to tell what sort of timbre the note is. So we eliminated the silence at the beginning. I'm now going to click and drag this so that now that does indeed line up on beat 1. We'll zoom back out a bit. And now if we play that again, it's much closer to being exactly on the beat, so that when someone else adds something to it, if they would have the option to just record to a metronome only, they would do that by muting here. But if they want to listen to what I played, they should do that alongside the metronome. You would just get rid of that mute button, and then they can play along with that perfectly in time. And so I think going to add another track to that.
Yeah, actually, Zach, I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna add a track, and I'm gonna take this moment to say, like, this studio can be used wholly independently, so you can create your own vast ensemble of sound completely on your own. But what I kind of love about Soundtrap, and for our purposes in this demonstration, is that you get to play with a friend or any number of friends, and between the two of you, you can add any number of layers. So now that Zach has created this awesome bass line, and maybe we were hanging out on Zoom and said, wouldn't it be great to make a blues and play music again together, even though we're 3,000 miles apart? Yeah, it'd be great. Okay, I'm going to lay down a bass line. Let's play create a blues. We're in the key of F. Awesome. So if you hit save, Zach, for us, the save button is our best friend. Also be careful though, because once you hit save, then if we make changes, it saves the full collaboration if that's what you intend to do. So anywho, but that's another story for later on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take over the screen share and show you how now I get access and would add a track and kind of copy the process here. And as you can see, what's cool is this whole time, yes, we're giving a lot of information about what it is we're doing, but if we were just hanging out in real time on Zoom, we can do this in moments. Just, oh yeah, what key do you want to play in? What time signature? Let's pick a tempo and go and just have fun with it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll share my screen next. So Zach, maybe when you take the screen share back, we can just remind folks how to collaborate. But there's a button you press that offers, you get a link that you can then email to whoever you're collaborating with. So this is the email I got from Soundtrap that Zach wants to collaborate with me. So all I have to do is hit this, my screen sharing is paused. Can y'all see my screen? Can you see my screen, Zach, or no? Hang on, I can fix it. New share. Let's do it this way. I think maybe now you can see what I'm talking about. So in my email here, all I have to do is click join the project. I already have a Soundtrap account, a free account. I just put in my email and here it is, join the project. And the studio will open and hopefully the Utah Blues with this awesome Barry sax line. Right there it is. So from my side, I can go ahead and hit play and just listen to what's there. Awesome. Sounds great, Zach. And then I say, oh, cool. My line for guitar is right here. I've got my guitar handy. I've already tuned it. All I have to do is decide, for me, I have my headphones on already. That's really important. I'm actually going to minimize this so you can see it a little better. The tempo is there. I'm turning my metronome on. I also like to have 2 bars. I'm going to turn the volume down just a hair. And I'm going to go ahead and record a guitar line, 12-bar blues style. So here's where I have a choice. I can either listen to the Barry sax bass line while I'm recording the guitar part, or what I'm actually going to do is mute that for now, so all I hear is the click. I think that this is totally up to preference, but for the very first track you record, it's kind of good practice to maybe think of it as a scratch track, because I can go back later and make a different guitar part or whatever I want to do. But for now, I just want to get something on there so we have a foundation to build from in our blues collaboration. So, like Zach pointed out before, here I am. I've got my guitar. I'm in tune. I've got the correct track highlighted. I am all the way at the beginning. and I am going to hit record. So stop button. There it is. My little voice is going to be at the end and we can show you how to cut that off. But for now, what I want to do is make sure if I'm still hanging out with Zach in Zoom, if I hit the save button, he should have access to what I just recorded. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to stop share so you can see what happens next.
All right, so I'll take things back over here. All right, so speaking of sharing things, you'll notice that guitar track isn't here just yet. I'm going to need to reload this. But as far as sharing things with any number of people, what you'd want to do for that, we've got a couple places. Either the purple share button up here at the top is one option. And you can type in the email here, or if you have someone you've previously invited, they might even pop up as just automatically. So you can share from that. And you can also copy the link from here if you want to send an email. So those are the ways that you'd probably want to go about doing that. You can also use the blue button over here on the side. It does very similar things. And you can even potentially do a video call through Soundtrap using this. But let's go ahead and reload the project so that I can see the guitar part. And there it is. All right. So from there, very similar to what I had done with the Barry sax. Okay, as we zoom way in, so we see there's the beginning of measure 2, but we're going to continue zooming in. That 1.2, 1.3, that would be beats 2 and 3 of measure 1. We zoom way in and we see there is that little bit of silence at the beginning. And so similar process. We don't want to destroy that onset of the note. Keep that, but we'll get close to it, slide over, and then let's see how this lines up. Here we go. So both parts together. And so, sounding pretty good so far. Right. So some other things that we can do now. We've got a foundation, we've got chords, and we've got a bass line. In a moment, I'm going to add a solo or a melodic line on top of that. But just a few other things in order to manipulate the sound here. You may have seen that just as I hit play that last time, I felt that the guitar part was a bit too quiet compared to the Barry sax. And so I used, by clicking and dragging, in this case I click, drag up, and it will increase the volume, or drag down and it will decrease. But you can increase or decrease the volume of any given track using that. If you'd like to increase or decrease the master volume, that can be done from down here. But just be cautious with that. You generally want to record at a relatively loud volume and then use the volume sliders to back off of that rather than the reverse. And the reason for that is if you were to record something with you singing or playing an instrument very softly and you decide that you need to bump up the volume, then any ambient noise in the room, whether it be a fan, maybe a light that's buzzing, if a fire truck went by in the background distantly, as soon as you boost that volume, maybe it wasn't noticeable before, but it would become more and more noticeable. And so you definitely make sure that you are the most prominent thing when you record in, as long as it's not peaking, as long as you don't get this volume bar up into the red area here at the end. And then you can dial it back from there. Some other ways to manipulate the sound once you have everything in. You can either mute a track. So at this point, if I really did want to focus on something, like if I didn't, something I wanted to make a more advanced edit to in the bari sax part, I could mute the guitar part, and then all I'm hearing is bari sax. That could also be a great tool, as Ali had mentioned, the idea of having a scratch track that, let's say later on that she wanted to record a different version of that guitar, we could just add an entirely new track, put that new guitar part in the new track, and then just leave the old one. Don't delete it, but leave it there muted. And then if you ever need to refer back to it, if for whatever reason something happens, you decide that's actually the preferable one, it's still there. So that is an option. The other thing you could do, rather than muting individual tracks, if it is really just a case of you need to hear one track and not all the others, let's say I had 10 tracks all with recordings here, if I just wanted to hear one of them, that's solo this track. You'll notice now that I would only hear guitar, and even though there's nothing in these two, if there was something there, everything else is muted as soon as I hit that solo button. So let me go ahead and add, speaking of solos, I'll add another part to this. So in order to do that, you'll notice right now, if I were to just hit record, it would record into this mic channel. And my intent is to have it show up in this solo channel. But let's just, for the sake of showing how things work here, I'm going to do that. You would just want to look out. If I accidentally had selected the guitar and hit record, it would start to erase this. And there's ways to undo it. Control Z, it works the same way as it does in a word processor to undo things. But we want to avoid that if possible. And so I'll record in the wrong channel, but at least not covering anything up here. And then we'll manipulate that a bit in a moment. So here we go. Oh, and almost forgot to turn on the metronome. There it is. And let's try that again. All right, and so I can already see it looks like I may have to do some edits with the beginning to get my first note to line up perfectly, but let's see what we've got so far.
Zach, while you're zooming in to look at that, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Say, on my side, right, I'm participating on the Zoom call or the Zoom collab. And what happened with Zoom is that the sound peaked at some point, so I could barely hear you at all over Zoom. So I want to take this moment to stress, like, this is what's so cool about using Soundtrap to capture the music. While it's great to make music in real time and have the visual aspect, like seeing Zach over there playing, and I can really feel like the groove that way, but I couldn't hear him. And certainly we can't layer what we're doing together in a way that actually is synced up because of lag that we've all struggled with. But what's really interesting and what I can't wait now is I feel like in my mind, my brain was sort of filling in the gaps, but now that we have it captured on Soundtrap, and once it gets lined up, we're going to hear the full sound of what you just did. And it's just a very cool way to get beyond the limitations in the virtual space of collaborative music making.
So let's go ahead and hit play. Let's just see what I have as far as a raw recording here. So here we go with all parts unmuted. So we can hear them all, but some of you may have noticed the beginning compared to the parts previously recorded. The beginning of that wasn't quite lined up, so let's zoom in a bit and focus on that. And so the intent there was for my first note to be on beat 3 of that first measure. So let's zoom way in and get that. That may be a bit too much. There we go. All right, and so here's that 1.3, and sure enough, there is that, and about the same sized gap as we saw before. So move this over. And now that we have several things recorded, you'll notice like here in that bari sax bass line part, we can see where that note, it might not be perfectly in line with the line on beat 3, but we can see where it starts its sound on beat 3, and I can roughly match that with other things that I record in. So I'll even slide that over a bit more. Okay, and now let's listen to that again with the solo part aligned. All right, and so there we go. A few other ways we can manipulate sound that I'll point out here. So one of them, which a phenomenon that some of you may have noticed that'll happen with, especially playing low notes on a piano. If you play lots of low notes together on a piano, you'll sort of get a muddy tone. But if you were to play the very same notes a few octaves up, more towards the upper end of the piano, the very same notes can sound good. That phenomenon, it's called the lower limits, is how close different intervals are when they're lower. But let's say that maybe I want to bump this up an octave so that my solo isn't in that same range as the bass. Or conversely, let's say that I only play a instrument that's in the alto or tenor range, but I need to create a bass line. I could do this in reverse to create a bass line out of that. So the timbre might be somewhat off, but what I would do there, I just did a right click on what's the solo part, go to change pitch, and these plus and minus, this all refers to a number of half steps. And so if we do plus 12, that would be bumping everything I just played up an octave. And so let's do that. Changes the pitch. And I'll isolate that line so we can hear what that sounds like on its own. Okay, so sort of an aggressive tenor sax sort of sound there once I bumped it up the octave. But it works, and I did it. And I didn't have to, that would be, some of those notes would be way out of the normal playing range of a bari sax, but I got there. And similarly, if you wanted, it wouldn't sound like for example, a bass flute, but if you took a normal flute and dropped it an octave or two, the timbre wouldn't be perfect, but you could create a bass line using a non-bass instrument. A few other things here. I'm going to use Control-Z to undo that for now. So that should, let's just make sure that did make that change. Maybe one more. I think that did it, 2 Control-Zs. And there we are. Okay, some other things here. Before, when I recorded the solo in, I'd mentioned how really I wanted to put that in this solo channel. And all I need to do to switch that, click and drag, just make sure like I can slide from side to side here. Just make sure you drag straight up to the next channel and you're good. Right now, I do have that freedom to drag wherever I want. If I wanted to have the beginning of this snap to specific measurements, like for example, zoom in a bit more, like here's the beat 1, measure 1, beat 2, measure 1, beat 3. This snap to grid feature, if I turn that on now, as I slide right there, now it's locked onto beat 2. And it's sliding. There's halfway between beats 2 and 3. And so it'll gravitate towards the beats and half beats and that sort of a thing. I'll turn that off temporarily. The one other feature I'll show you, which this could be helpful if you'd like to record something that's somewhat up-tempo on an instrument that you're not quite as comfortable with. We just recorded that at 100 beats per minute. But a very cool feature here is that if we change this tempo, now that things are recorded in, and we made sure that they're all perfectly in time with the metronome at this 100 beats a minute, what we can now do is click on the tempo. We're going to change this. I'm going to go with 140 beats per minute. Confirm. And this, we can either just change the metronome and leave it alone, which is not what we want to do here. If I click adjust, it's going to change all three of those tracks. It will increase the tempo, but it won't change anything else about them. It will keep the pitch the same. That's opposed, for those of you familiar with a record player, if you were to spin the record on that, like take your finger and spin it faster, the tempo of the song you're listening to would go up, but also the pitch would start to rise as well. And so this feature, we just speed up the tempo, but not the pitch. So give this just a moment, and we'll listen to a faster version of everything we just recorded. All right, and so here is what that sounds like. All right.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, in a very, pretty quick amount of time, we were able to create a song together, manipulate it in a bunch of fun ways. Certainly, the sky's the limit in the other tracks we can add. As you kind of can see, there are tons of sounds and patches and synthesized options that can be included. Really, it's a very creative outlet. And pretty much you can access almost every feature without even having to pay for the service, which is pretty awesome. So hopefully you're feeling inspired to get out there. I know personally I want to go add a drum track so we can get the metronome click out of there and get some drums in there and whatever else it is we want to add. We could create lyrics next if this were, if we were working clinically in music therapy, perhaps like this would be the time now that we've got a foundation for our piece. If it needed to be faster or slower, we can manipulate it. If we wanted to create some lyrics or, a melody, harmonies, everything we can possibly do, we can have our real time together on Zoom and work together in real time just by clicking the save button and both have access to the studio collaboration. It's a pretty amazing tool. Hopefully you have learned a few things about it today. I just want to say thank you to Zach because, I mean, it's, we're all learning as we go with this new technology that's ever changing and evolving, but being able to still make live music together in the world is a really important and powerful thing. So are there any last words of advice or tips that you have for folks out there as they are embarking on their virtual jam journeys?
Well, so I discovered this completely more or less on my own in spring of 2020. And so I would just say, get out there, start playing and start experimenting. We didn't even get into a lot of the automated loops, a lot of the computer generated sounds that you can work in with Soundtrap, and just experimenting is going to be the best way to get used to everything that I mentioned today, but also to build on that into a lot of the other things that you're able to do with Soundtrap.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, and thanks everyone for taking the time to learn a little bit about this technology. And hopefully, if you need anything, you know how to reach me or us, and certainly wherever this link gets shared, we can provide that contact info. And just happy music making. Thanks, Zach. I'm going to go add some drums now.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.